It was a cold Thursday afternoon. The kind that made your bones ache before you even stepped outside. I had just finished my grocery run. My cart full of vegetables, cat food, and a loaf of fresh bread. The parking lot was nearly empty. The winter wind carrying the faint sound of shopping carts rattling against the pavement. As I pushed my cart back toward the return rack, I heard a laugh. A familiar one. Soft, but full of that same confidence my son had since he was a boy. I froze mid-step. It couldn't be. But then, I heard his voice clearly, my son's voice. "She never noticed," he said, his tone low, almost amused. "The loan's finally approved." I stopped breathing for a moment. My fingers tightened around the cold metal of the cart handle. The words didn't make sense. She never noticed. The loan's finally approved. What loan? Who was he talking about? Instinctively, I took a half step back, pressing myself against the side of my car. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it echo in my throat. I leaned slightly, peeking around the trunk, and there he was, my son Daniel. My only child. He was standing just a few feet away, by a silver sedan I didn't recognize. He looked sharp, dressed better than usual, smiling like a man who had just pulled off something important. Beside him stood a woman I'd never seen before. Younger than him, maybe mid-30s, long red scarf fluttering in the wind. She handed him a folder, and he slipped it into his jacket pocket, still grinning. "I told you it would work," he said. "She trusts me completely. Always has." I felt my knees weaken. I gripped the car door for balance, trying to steady myself. The world seemed to tilt a little, the way it does when you get bad news but your mind refuses to accept it. He couldn't mean me. Surely not me. I wanted to step out, call his name, ask him what he meant, but something in his tone stopped me. There was a confidence, a carelessness, like a man who knew he wouldn't be caught. The wind cut through my coat, but I didn't move. My body had gone numb, yet my mind was racing faster than ever. What loan? What had he done? I watched as the woman touched his arm, and said something I couldn't hear. He laughed again, the same easy laugh I'd heard since he was little, when he'd come home covered in mud and say, "Don't worry, Mom, it's just a little dirt." That laugh, it used to mean innocence. Now it made my stomach turn. He got into the car with her, engine starting, their voices fading as the car rolled away. I stood there long after they were gone, staring at the empty spot where they'd been. The bread in my bag had gone cold. My fingers ached from gripping the metal cart. Still I couldn't move. I wanted to believe I'd misheard him, that maybe there was some harmless explanation. But deep down a part of me, the mother in me, knew something was terribly wrong. She never noticed. "The loan's finally approved." The words kept echoing in my mind, over and over, as if they were carved into the wind. When I finally got into my car, I couldn't start the engine right away. My hands were shaking too badly. I sat there in silence, the world outside a blur through the windshield. I thought about the boy I'd raised, the boy who used to hug me before school and promise he'd make me proud. And now, I didn't know then that those few words would unravel the life I thought I knew. Before I tell you what happened next, please subscribe if you enjoy real stories that remind us how fragile trust can be. Now let me tell you the rest. When I finally managed to start the car that afternoon, I drove home in silence. The radio was on, but I couldn't hear a single word. The windscreen wipers moved in slow rhythm, sweeping away the drizzle as if erasing thoughts I wasn't ready to face. My home sat at the end of a quiet street, a little one-story house I'd lived in for over 30 years. The paint was fading, the porch creaked in the cold, but it was mine, my safe place. I had built this life piece by piece after my husband passed 10 years ago. It wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful, until that moment in the parking lot when my piece cracked like thin glass. I set the groceries down on the counter, my mind still circling his words. She never noticed. The loan's finally approved. At 70, I've learned not to jump to conclusions. Life teaches you that sometimes things sound worse than they are. Still, that night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's face, smiling, confident, hiding something. He had always been my world. My miracle baby. I'd tried for years to have children, endured endless doctor visits and broken hopes. And then at 38, he arrived, tiny and perfect. I named him Daniel because it meant God is my judge. His father, Michael, adored him. He used to call him our golden boy. Even when times were hard, we did everything for him. Michael worked extra shifts at the factory, so Daniel could attend a better school. I sewed his school uniforms, packed his lunches, and went without new clothes so he could have books and shoes that fit. After Michael died of a heart attack, Daniel became my reason to keep going. He was in college then, and I remember promising him through tears, "You'll never have to worry about money, son. I'll help however I can." I took a small loan that year to help cover his tuition. I worked part-time at the library, clipping coupons, skipping hair appointments, little sacrifices that never felt like sacrifices at all, because that's what mothers do. When Daniel graduated, I was proud beyond words. He found a job at a finance company, wore suits, talked about investments and returns, things I never quite understood. I used to smile and say, "You're the smart one, Danny. You handle the numbers, I'll handle the cooking." He would laugh and kiss me on the cheek. "Don't worry, Mom. I've got you." And I believed him. Completely. Over the years, he took over my bills, set up online banking for me, and told me it was easier if he managed everything digitally. "Technology's a bit much, Mom," he'd tease gently. "You'll just get locked out of your own account." So I let him handle it all. I trusted him more than anyone. After all, he was my son. The boy who used to bring me wildflowers and promised to build me a house one day. But lately, things had been different. He'd stopped calling as often. When he visited, he was always in a hurry, checking his phone every few minutes. I'd ask, "Is everything all right?" And he'd smile and say, "Just work stuff, Mom. Don't worry." Except I did. Because a mother always feels when something isn't right. Last month, he'd brought me some papers to sign. "Routine update for your insurance," he said casually, pointing where I should write my name. I didn't even read them. I just trusted him like always. That memory now clawed at me. My stomach turned as I thought about it. Was that what he'd meant by "she never noticed"? That evening, I tried to calm myself. I brewed a cup of chamomile tea, turned on my favorite radio program, and sat by the window watching the streetlights flicker on. Life around me felt painfully ordinary. Neighbors walking dogs, children laughing, the mail truck rumbling past. But inside, a storm was brewing. I kept replaying Daniel's words, his tone, his laughter. The loan's finally approved. The next morning, I told myself not to assume the worst. Maybe he meant a personal loan. Maybe she wasn't me. Maybe I was overthinking. I even tried calling him. He didn't answer. Instead, he texted later. "Sorry, Mom, busy at work. Talk later." That night, I lay awake again. The clock ticked like a hammer in the quiet house. My cat, Rosie, curled by my feet, but even her soft purring couldn't drown out the unease growing inside me. By Sunday morning, I was exhausted. I went to church as usual, hoping the familiar hymns would settle my heart. I prayed silently, "Lord, please let me be wrong about my boy." But as I left the chapel, I saw a new car parked outside, the same silver sedan I'd seen in the parking lot. Daniel was in the driver's seat, talking on the phone, unaware that I was standing just a few feet away. He looked worried, angry even. His hand gripped the steering wheel tightly. "I told you I'll handle it." I heard him say through the half-open window, "She doesn't need to know. Just give it a few more days." My breath caught. He turned his head, and for a split second, our eyes met. His expression changed instantly, shock then guilt. He waved quickly, forced a smile, and drove off. I stood frozen on the church steps, my Bible clutched to my chest. Something was terribly wrong. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. I opened my old metal filing box and began going through my papers, the ones I still kept copies of, just in case. Insurance, mortgage, medical, bank letters. Everything looked normal, until I found one envelope I didn't recognize. It was from the bank. Unopened. I stared at it, my hands trembling slightly. Should I open it? I took a deep breath, slid a finger under the flap, and began to read. That letter would change everything I thought I knew about my son. The letter was brief but cold. "Dear Mrs. Allen, This is a courtesy reminder that your first payment on your $60,000 personal loan is due on the 12th of this month. I read it twice, my eyes blurring, the words refusing to make sense. $60,000? I had never taken a loan in my life after paying off the mortgage years ago. My first instinct was that it had to be a mistake. Someone at the bank must have confused me with another customer. But my name was there. My address. My account number. Everything. My pulse quickened. I checked the rest of my mail, rifling through every envelope on the table. Another letter from the same bank was tucked beneath a grocery coupon booklet. It was an approval confirmation, dated 2 weeks ago. Approved under my name. My hand started shaking so badly I had to set the paper down. Daniel. I remembered his words in the parking lot. She never noticed. The loan's finally approved. It hit me like a brick to the chest. I turned on the lamp, grabbed my reading glasses, and studied the documents again, forcing myself to stay calm. I'd been through enough storms in life to know that panic only makes the waves higher. At the bottom of the approval letter was a signature line. Mine. Except it wasn't. The loops were too big. The handwriting slightly off. Daniel had seen me sign things enough times to mimic it, almost perfectly, but I knew my own hand. My throat tightened. I whispered into the empty kitchen. "Oh, Daniel, what have you done?" For a few minutes, I just sat there, the sound of the clock ticking louder and louder, until it felt like a drumbeat in my chest. Then I reached for the phone. The bank's customer service line rang 3 times before a young woman answered cheerfully. "Thank you for calling First Metro Bank. My name is Hannah. How can I help you today?" I tried to sound calm. "Yes, this is Margaret Allen. I received a letter about a loan in my name, but I never applied for one." There was a pause, the faint clicking of keys in the background. "All right, Mrs. Allen, let me check your account. May I have your date of birth and the last 4 digits of your social security number?" I gave them to her. My palms were sweating. After a moment, Hannah spoke again, her tone a little slower now. "Yes, ma'am, I see the loan here, approved 2 weeks ago, for $60,000, 3-year term. It shows as signed by you." "That's impossible," I said quietly. "I didn't sign for anything. Can you please send me a copy of whatever document you have?" "Of course. We can email or mail it to your address on file." "Mail it, please," I said. "I want the physical copy." She hesitated. "Mrs. Allen, are you saying this loan might be fraudulent?" I could barely speak. "Yes," I whispered. "I think it might be." After hanging up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone. The room suddenly felt too quiet, too still. Rosie, my cat, brushed against my leg, sensing my unease. I picked her up and held her close, my heart aching. By the time the documents arrived 2 days later, I was exhausted from worry. I didn't even open them right away. I made tea, sat down at the table, and told myself to be brave. The papers were neatly printed, official and clean. The last page bore the same forged signature. Mine, but not mine. Under applicant's contact number was Daniel's phone number. My stomach dropped. There was no doubt anymore. He had done this. My son had taken out a massive loan in my name. I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to slow my breathing. He must have used the papers I'd signed. The ones he said were for insurance updates. I remembered his calm smile that day, the way he'd stood by the counter saying, "Just some signatures, Mom. Nothing complicated." I felt sick. I spent the rest of the evening pacing the living room, the documents spread out on the coffee table. It didn't feel real. This was Daniel. The boy who cried when he broke my favorite vase, who hugged me after his father's funeral, promising he'd always take care of me. I tried to reason it out. Maybe he was in trouble. Maybe he just needed help and was too ashamed to ask. But to forge my name? To take money in secret? That wasn't a mistake. That was betrayal. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house sounded louder, every shadow sharper. Around midnight, I got up and went to the window, staring out at the dark street. My mind replayed the memory of him as a child, running across the yard, his father chasing him with a garden hose, laughter ringing through the air. How had that little boy grown into this? By morning, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to confront him unprepared. I needed proof, something undeniable. I went to the local electronics store and bought a small voice recorder. It felt strange, sneaky even, but necessary. I told myself it wasn't to hurt him, it was to protect myself. 2 days later, he came by unexpectedly. "Hey, Mom," he said, stepping inside with his usual easy grin. "I was in the area and thought I'd check on you." My heart pounded, but I smiled and offered him tea, trying to act normal. He sat at the table, chatting about work, avoiding eye contact. As he talked, I noticed something new. A nervous twitch in his fingers, drumming lightly on the table. I reached into my cardigan pocket and turned on the recorder. "I got some letters from the bank," I said, keeping my voice even. "Something about a loan." He froze mid-sentence, then forced a laugh. "Oh, that? It's probably junk mail. They send offers all the time." "They said it was approved. Under my name." The color drained from his face. "Mom, you must be mistaken. Maybe it's some scam." "I spoke to the bank," I said quietly. "They sent me the papers. Your number is listed as the contact." The room fell silent. The clock ticked once, twice. Finally, he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "All right. Yes. I took it out. But listen, I was going to tell you. I just needed the money for a short while. Things have been rough, and I couldn't get approved on my own. You've got great credit, Mom. It was just paperwork. I'll pay it back before you even notice." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You forged my name," I whispered. "You stole my identity." "It's not stealing if I'm your son," he snapped, then immediately softened his tone. "Look, I didn't mean to scare you. I just didn't want you worrying. It's temporary." Temporary. The word echoed like an insult. "You've made me liable for $60,000, I said, my voice trembling but steady. "Do you have any idea what that means for me?" He reached out as if to touch my hand. "Mom, I swear I'll fix this." I pulled my hand away. "You've already fixed it in your favor." He looked down, unable to meet my eyes. When he finally left, I sat in silence, staring at the empty teacups. My phone still recorded, capturing the sound of the door closing and my shaking breath afterward. I had my proof now. Proof of his voice, his confession, his betrayal. That night, I saved the recording to my laptop, labeling it simply, "Daniel Loan Evidence." Then I sat there in the dark, whispering to myself, "Tomorrow, I'll go to the bank. Tomorrow I'll make this right." But as the hours passed, tears finally came, not from anger, but from heartbreak. Because no matter what he'd done, he was still my boy. And that made the wound cut even deeper. I stayed up until dawn, the paper spread before me, the recording still echoing in my head. "It's not stealing if I'm your son." Those words would haunt me for a long time. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, I knew what I had to do. The sun was barely up when I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of black coffee cooling beside me. The documents lay in a neat pile, and next to them my phone, still containing the recording from the day before. I listened to it once more, just to be sure I wasn't losing my mind. There it was, clear as day, his voice calm and careless. "I took it out. You've got great credit, Mom." Every word stung like salt on an open wound. I could have gone straight to the police, but something inside me needed closure before consequences. I needed to face him, to look him in the eyes and ask why. So that evening I called him. "Dinner tonight, Daniel. I'm making roast chicken. Come around 7. He hesitated for a moment on the line. "Sure, Mom. Everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I said softly. "Just want to see you." When I hung up, my hands were trembling. I'd cooked that same meal 100 times before, his favorite since childhood. But this time, it felt like a ritual, a quiet preparation for something painful but necessary. As the clock neared 7, I placed my phone on the counter, recording again. The tiny red light blinked, hidden behind a napkin holder. He arrived right on time, bringing with him the scent of expensive cologne, and a smile too bright to be honest. "Something smells amazing," he said, hanging his coat. "You didn't have to go all out." I managed a small smile. It's been a while since we had dinner together. We ate mostly in silence. He talked about work, half-hearted stories, nervous laughter. I nodded, letting him dig his own quiet hole. Then, as I poured him another glass of water, I said almost casually, "Daniel, the bank called again today." He froze mid-bite. "Oh, what about?" "They said the loan officer might need to verify my income." He swallowed hard. "That's strange. Probably a mix-up." "Maybe," I said, setting the pitcher down. "But they also mentioned that the payments would start next week. $60,000. That's quite a sum." His eyes darted up to mine, panic flickering for the briefest second before he forced a grin. "Mom, come on. I told you I'll take care of it. Don't stress." "I'm not stressed," I said quietly. "I'm disappointed." The room seemed to shrink. The ticking clock on the wall suddenly felt deafening. "Daniel," I continued, "I spoke to the bank. I saw the documents. I know you forged my signature." He dropped his fork. "Mom, please. Don't lie to me." My voice cracked slightly, but I held his gaze. "After everything your father and I sacrificed for you, how could you do this? How could you use my name for something so deceitful?" He looked down, his voice low. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was in debt, bad debt. Some old business investment went wrong. I just needed a little help to fix things before it ruined me." "You could have asked me," I said. "You didn't have to steal from me." "I wasn't stealing," he said quickly, desperation creeping into his voice. "You're my mother. It's not like I took it from a stranger. I would have paid it all back." "That's not how trust works, Daniel." He pushed his chair back, pacing the kitchen. "I was trying to protect you. If you knew how much trouble I was in, you'd have worried yourself sick." I stared at him. This man who once cried in my arms when he scraped his knee, now standing there trying to justify fraud as protection. "Don't twist this," I said firmly. "You weren't protecting me. You were protecting yourself." He stopped pacing and leaned against the counter, eyes glistening. I didn't know what else to do. Everything was falling apart. I thought I could fix it before you ever found out. I sighed, the weight of years pressing down on me. "And now you've destroyed the very thing you were trying to protect, our relationship." He stepped closer. "Mom, please. I'll pay every cent. I'll close the loan tomorrow." I reached into my pocket and took out my phone, tapping the screen to stop the recording. The soft click echoed like a gunshot. "I already have your confession," I said quietly. "Everything you said today and yesterday is recorded." He blinked, stunned. "You recorded me?" "Yes. Because I knew you'd try to talk your way out of it." He opened his mouth, then closed it again, at a loss for words. "Tomorrow," I continued, "I'll be speaking to the bank's fraud department and the police. You'll have to face what you've done." Tears welled in his eyes. "Mom, please don't. I'll fix it. I swear." "Daniel," I said softly, "I forgive you, but forgiveness doesn't erase consequences." He shook his head, his voice breaking. "You don't understand. I was drowning. I thought if I just had a little money, I could turn things around, make you proud again." My throat tightened. "You don't make me proud by lying, Daniel. You make me proud by being honest, by taking responsibility. You were my greatest joy. Now you're my deepest heartbreak." He covered his face with his hands, shoulders shaking. I wanted to reach out, to comfort him, but I couldn't. Some lessons can't be softened. When he finally looked up, his face was pale and wet with tears. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to protect what's left of my life," I said. "And maybe in time, you'll learn to rebuild yours." He stood there for a long moment, then turned toward the door. At the threshold, he paused. "Mom, I'm sorry." I nodded slowly. "I know." He left without another word. The house fell into silence again. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator filled the air. I walked over to the table, sat down, and pressed play on the recording. His voice filled the room once more, but this time, it didn't make me tremble. It steadied me. Tomorrow, I would go to the authorities. Tomorrow, I would reclaim my name. As I sat there in the dim kitchen, the scent of roast chicken lingering in the air, I realized something painful but liberating. Love doesn't mean covering someone's sin. Sometimes love means stepping back and letting truth do its work. And that, I decided, was what I would do. The next morning dawned gray and cold, matching the heaviness in my chest. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's face, his tears, his excuses, his fear. But I also saw the forged papers, and heard the word temporary echoing in my head like a cruel joke. I poured myself a cup of coffee, gathered the evidence, the bank letters, the printed loan documents, and my phone with the recordings, and slipped them into a folder. My hands shook, but not from age this time. It was something else. Determination. By 8 o'clock, I was sitting in the small waiting area of the local police station. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. A kind-faced officer approached the counter. "Good morning, ma'am. How can we help you?" I opened my folder, laid out the papers, and said, "I need to report a case of fraud. Someone took out a $60,000 loan in my name." He looked at the documents carefully, eyebrows furrowing. "Do you know who did this?" I swallowed hard. "Yes, my son." The officer's eyes softened. "I'm sorry to hear that, ma'am. You'd be surprised how often we get cases like this. Family members, people they trust." He led me to a small office, where another officer, a woman named Detective Lopez, took my full statement. I explained everything, from the parking lot to the forged signature, the phone call, the recordings. I handed her the evidence, my voice steady even as my heart ached. She listened carefully, nodding, occasionally asking a clarifying question. When I finished, she said gently, "You did the right thing, Mrs. Allen. We'll open a case and contact the bank immediately. You may need to provide handwriting samples to confirm the forgery." I nodded. "Whatever you need. I just want this fixed." After signing a few forms, I walked out of the precinct feeling both lighter and heavier at once. The weight of the secret was gone. But in its place was the grief of what I'd just done, turning in my own child. At the bank, the fraud specialist recognized me from my earlier call. "Mrs. Allen, please come in." He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes, the sort that made you feel safe. I handed him the folder, and replayed the recording of Daniel's confession. When it ended, the man sighed softly. "We'll submit this to our fraud investigation team. You don't have to worry. If the signature is proven forged, the loan will be voided. The responsibility will shift to the person who took it." He looked at me with a sympathetic expression. "It must be hard having it be your son." I gave a small nod. "Harder than I can describe." After leaving the bank, I drove home and sat in the driveway for a long time, engine off, watching the bare trees sway in the cold wind. I had done everything right, and yet my heart felt shattered. That evening my neighbor, Mrs. Walker, stopped by. She was a retired teacher, the kind who always brought you soup when you were sick. She took one look at me and said, "You've been crying." I nodded. "It's Daniel. He did something terrible." Over tea, I told her the truth. She didn't interrupt, just held my hand across the table. When I finished, she said quietly, "Sometimes love means letting them fall, so they can finally stand on their own." Her words lingered in my mind all night. 3 days later, I got a call from Detective Lopez. "Mrs. Allen, the bank confirmed the signature is forged. The loan will be canceled, and the case is moving forward. Your son will be contacted for questioning." My stomach twisted. "Thank you, Detective." The call ended, and I sat at the table, staring at the phone. I had expected relief, but all I felt was an empty ache. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find Daniel standing there, pale and shaken. "Mom, please," he began, his voice trembling. "I got a call from the police. They said there's an investigation. Why did you do this?" I looked at him for a long time before answering. "Because I had to. Because what you did wasn't just a mistake, Daniel. It was a crime." He took a step closer. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I was desperate." "I'm sorry." "I know you are," I said softly. "But being sorry doesn't undo what's been done." Tears filled his eyes. They said I could go to jail. I swallowed hard. "You need to face what you did. Maybe it's the only way you'll learn." He fell silent. Then quietly, "I'll pay it all back. Every cent. Just don't hate me." I don't hate you, I whispered. I love you. But I can't protect you from the truth anymore. He broke down then, sobbing quietly. I wanted to reach for him, but I stayed still. When he finally left, I closed the door gently and leaned against it, tears streaming down my face. Days turned into weeks. The investigation moved quickly. The police confirmed the fraud, and Daniel admitted to forging my signature. Because it was his first offense and he cooperated, they offered probation and restitution instead of jail time. The detective called to inform me of the outcome. Your son has agreed to repay you $10,000 in restitution, and the loan has been completely voided. You won't owe a cent. I thanked her and hung up. The relief came like a wave, followed by exhaustion. That night, I sat in my living room. The lights dimmed, my folder of documents finally closed. Rosie purred in my lap as I whispered, "It's over." But I knew the truth. It wasn't really over. The paperwork could be cleared, the debt erased, but the trust I'd lost couldn't be restored so easily. Still, I chose peace. I called my sister in Florida, told her everything, and she said, "You did what a mother had to do. You saved both your son and yourself." For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. The next morning, I went through my bank accounts, changed every password, and updated all my personal security details. This time, I didn't ask anyone for help. I wanted to understand every number, every line. I was taking back control of my life, one click at a time. As I finished, I whispered to myself, "No more signatures I don't read." Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds for the first time in days. It lit up the frost on the windowpane, sparkling like tiny shards of hope. The damage was done, but I was still standing, older, wiser, stronger. And that was enough. It's been 8 months since that day in the parking lot. The day my world cracked open with 7 quiet words. She never noticed. The loan's finally approved. For a long time afterward, I carried that pain like an invisible weight. Every time I looked at Daniel's childhood photos, I felt both pride and sorrow. Pride in the boy he once was, sorrow for the man he'd become. But as the seasons changed, so did I. Healing, I've learned, doesn't arrive with grand gestures. It comes slowly, through small acts of courage. At first, I focused on rebuilding my independence. The very thing Daniel had used against me, my trust, became the thing I decided to reclaim. I started by walking into the bank alone one morning and asking to speak with a financial advisor. The young man who helped me couldn't have been more than 30, but he treated me with patience and respect. "I want to learn," I told him. "Properly this time." And so I did. Week by week, I attended free senior classes at the community center. I learned how to read online statements, check credit reports, and recognize scams. I even got myself a new laptop, something I'd always been too nervous to use. Each time I clicked through a banking page without needing to call for help, I felt a quiet triumph. For so many years, I'd handed over control because I thought that's what love looked like, trusting someone completely. But now I see that real love includes responsibility, even toward ourselves. The community center became my second home. There were other widows, retirees, and single parents, all learning, sharing stories, laughing at our own mistakes. One woman, Margaret, said something that stuck with me. "When people betray you, they don't just take your money. They try to take your confidence. Don't let them." So I didn't. Bit by bit, I found pieces of myself I hadn't realized I'd lost. I started volunteering once a week, helping other seniors navigate their online bills and digital forms. The first time I guided a woman through setting up her account, she said, "You're so patient." I smiled and told her, "That's what life teaches you when you've been through a storm." Daniel called a few times after the investigation ended. The first call was awkward, stiff apologies wrapped in guilt. He'd started financial counseling as part of his probation. I could hear the shame in his voice. "Mom," he said quietly one evening, "I don't deserve your forgiveness." I took a long breath before answering. Forgiveness isn't about deserving, Daniel. It's about letting go so the hurt doesn't grow roots. He cried then, and I did too. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a beginning. Now he visits occasionally, helping around the house, though the laughter between us is softer, cautious, fragile. I don't ask about his debts, and he doesn't bring them up. We talk about simple things. The garden, the neighbors, Rosie's mischief. Every so often, I catch him looking at me with an expression that's part remorse, part gratitude. I think he's learning. I hope he is. As for me, I've learned that trust isn't something you give once. It's something you build brick by brick, and sometimes you have to rebuild it from the ground up. Last week, at the senior club, they asked me to speak at a workshop for financial safety. I stood at the front of the small hall, my heart fluttering but my voice steady. I used to think that wisdom came with age, I told them. But it doesn't, not automatically. It comes with awareness, with learning from the very people who break your heart. Sometimes, the lesson arrives wearing your child's face. They listened quietly, and when I finished, a few of them hugged me. One woman whispered, "You're brave." I smiled. No, just old enough to know better now. When I got home that evening, the sun was setting behind the maple tree out front. The light filtered through the leaves, painting golden shapes on the walls. I stood there for a while, breathing it in, the peace, the quiet, the knowledge that I had survived something that could have destroyed me. I went to my desk, opened a small notebook, and wrote down a few words. My promise to myself. I will live wisely, love carefully, and trust thoughtfully. Then, as the house settled into stillness, I thought of Michael, my late husband, and whispered, "You'd be proud, love. I finally learned to stand on my own." I sat down with a cup of tea and opened my laptop, checking my account, something I never thought I'd do without fear. The numbers were modest but mine. Truly mine. And as I stared at them, I smiled. I raised him to be honest. I said softly to myself. I never thought I'd have to teach myself the same lesson. Never sign what you haven't read. If this story touched your heart or reminded you how precious trust is, please subscribe. There are more stories like this, stories of love, loss, and the strength to begin again.